We are structured around a 5-pillar model. I won't read them all to you. The pillars are policy, law, and diplomacy, education and training, and of course much of the academic development work falls into education and training, science and technology. As U.S. academics, we are held to the publish or perish standard, so we need to develop scholarship, we need to develop new scientific understanding and so forth. And that's all the sort of traditional academic side, the left side of the columns. But it is absolutely critical that, as was argued, I think quite convincingly a moment ago, academia has to be engaged, and government has to be engaged with academia. So we use our connectivity with the national laboratory community and others in the U.S. government to understand some of their needs in both operational capabilities, intelligence capabilities, and in real-world missions. And we use that to inform our academic program, and vice versa. We use our academic program to develop studies and so forth for our colleagues in government. Doesn't guarantee they'll listen to us, but at least hopefully we're looking at questions that they find interesting. So, our program is highly interdisciplinary. It was born in the nuclear engineering program. It is certainly very strong in the nuclear engineering program, but we span a fairly wide variety of entities and academic units on campus. I won't read them all to you, but you can see here there's a number that you probably wouldn't expect necessarily. Okay? So we have engaged fairly broadly over the last half dozen years. Our school color, if you're not familiar with Tennessee, is orange, and so we are slowly but surely trying to turn the world orange. So the various countries that we've engaged with, either directly with academia or academia and government, are shown here. Fairly extensive connectivity across the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and South America. The types of engagements we have undertaken: one, how do we help develop faculty competencies and capabilities? We've done a number of workshops with faculty and with government officials, because again, part of the challenge is, just as we said here, that not only do the faculty need to be competent and capable, but they also need to be connected to their governments. So you see here a few pictures from some of our exercises. The top one here is a workshop on nuclear security education we did with the University of Science and Technology in Algiers. We had a wonderful opportunity to spend a fair bit of time in Egypt, and if you ever visit Egypt, I highly recommend a cruise down the Nile. So here's a lovely mosque that is ancient, taken from the Nile in the area of Aswan. We also bring faculty from other universities to our university and have residential opportunities. It may be a month, it may be a semester. Juan Cuche just spent a sabbatical with us, just short of a year. So we have had a couple of folks from South Africa, a gentleman from Nigeria, and we've got 2 in process right now from Egypt. Student engagement also matters. So we also bring students to our program. This is sometimes challenging for us economically, because at least in the engineering program, if you're not supported on a grant, very few students stick around for an engineering degree. So we've had a number of students supported by their home governments, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia. We've been able to support some students through other means from Nigeria and Egypt. And importantly, we have connected our student professional organization. INMM is the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management, so a professional society focused on the safety, security, and proper handling of nuclear materials. And we have a student chapter that has been very active, and we have been able to use that student chapter to engage with students in other universities. And so, for example, they've now done joint projects with students at Jordan University of Science and Technology, University of Ibn Tufayl in Morocco, the University in Algiers, and a few others.
Howard, do you have 2 minutes?
Well, I was afraid you'd say that. Pedagogical and other support, we do a lot of work developing and sharing instructional materials. The photograph you see here is the International Nuclear Security Educators Network. We have contributed very strongly to that. We've been a member of that essentially since it began. We help programs navigate some of the administrative issues. Now, obviously, we're not an expert in the development of an academic curriculum in a particular country, but we can serve as peer reviewers, we can serve as external experts, and we can support important things, even though you don't think about them, like promotion and tenure reviews. Faculty like to have promotions, they like to establish tenure, and they often need someone in the field to be able to render a professional opinion on the quality of their scholarship. That's not an invitation, by the way, to flood me with requests. I already get enough. We also are working very closely with a number of international organizations. INSEN, as I've already mentioned, we are, I believe at this point, the only U.S. university that is a member of ISARDA, the European Safeguards Research and Development Association, the World Institute, IEA, and so forth. And lastly, I think almost lastly, to support the continued development and sustainability of the faculty side of the equation. Again, faculty in developing countries are also under the same pressure to publish, to exhibit scholarship, and there often is not a convenient vehicle for that. And so we established in 2015 an international journal focused on nuclear security. It's peer-reviewed, it's open access, and it is largely focused on authors who are not necessarily English as a first language speakers. So we spend a lot of time and effort with our technical writing program at the university. That's the Department of English you saw on our earlier slide. Not only publishing the journal, but working with authors on a very close basis to help prepare their manuscripts so that it is not only technically correct and passes peer review, but also linguistically as elegant as possible. So, some key lessons learned, and this is my last slide with information. As we've observed this over the years, local champions are absolutely needed. If you're talking to a university that does not have a faculty member who has the passion to make this happen, it will not happen. In my opinion, at this point, the most impact is in graduate education. Larger geopolitical issues can affect academic engagements. No surprise there. When the relationship between, since I'm a U.S. citizen, between the U.S. and another country goes sour, it impacts our ability to engage. You have to be very patient. The U.S. side funding, the attention span of the U.S. government for these sort of things tends to be at best 18-month chunks, and so trying to maintain a steady program in that sort of funding environment is challenging. And then we have found many more students who are interested in coming to UT than we have the resources to support. And I suspect as the other programs develop and reach out, we will find the same thing as well. And so with that, I will conclude.
Thank you, Howard. Question and comment on floor, please.
Jae-bong Kim from the International Policy Studies Institute. I have a very simple question to Professor Ho. How do you explain the prominent absence of NAFTA neighbors, Canada and Mexico, in terms of the international cooperation of your institute? Thank you.
So it's an excellent question. It's largely driven by the funding agencies that support us to go out and do these engagements. The State Department, for whatever reason, is not particularly interested in nuclear security education in Canada or Mexico at the moment. And as the program develops, we have to go where we have the funding opportunities to support it.
Good. Please.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Turin. I'm an NERIC fellow here. My question for Professor Hall is, how do you measure the impact of your work that you do at the university level? Do you have any anecdotes or data about how students that have gone through your program have contributed to the strengthening of security culture at their home institutions?
So that is a very good question. There's a couple of ways that we look at that. One is we look at part of our outreach is to try to draw universities that we're reaching out to into active participation in both professional societies that are relevant. So INMM is one, it's not the only one. Plus we also try to draw them into membership and participation in the INSEN network, the International Nuclear Security Educators Network. Now those are both metrics that are relevant to faculty. The life cycle of education, we're starting to see graduates now from the programs that we've worked with who are now graduating and starting to take careers, and we've seen a few of them start to show up at places like the International Atomic Energy Agency. None yet in academia, but it's very easy for us to measure that with our own students and the students who have gone through our program in Tennessee, particularly international students who are sponsored there. It's difficult for us to see the sort of second order effects from, for example, we've worked with several universities in Morocco for almost 6 years. Morocco has a very active, very mature program now, but I don't necessarily have visibility to all their student outcomes. So for example, I think I showed a picture of one of the folks in our group who's with us from Nigeria. He came to us from the Nigerian Atomic Energy Commission, and will actually go back and assume a position with them when he finishes his graduate degree with us, so he'll be immediately contributing in that program. We've had a number of students from the Middle East, and most of them have just now graduated, and they're back working on trying to figure out where their next position is, or whether they're going to continue. Most of them have done the master's degree, whether they'll continue to a PhD.
Okay. Please.
I'm Songil Choi from UNIST. My question is, since you are very active in INSEN, when I look at the membership in INSEN network, there are a number of newcomer states. What is the motivation to join to the INSEN network and then develop a nuclear security education program in the university? Because is it there are real manpower demand in the current nuclear or radiological program in the newcomer country, or they see the nuclear security as a criteria for large-scale nuclear power program?
So the issue of manpower, I think, depends on where you're setting. In the United States, for example, we have a very large demographic challenge coming at us in terms of the age cohort of people who work in this field. And so, at least in the United States, we have a very strong demand for the students that we produce. The IEEA also has a challenge in demographics that they're struggling to deal with. And the IEEA also would really be happy if they could broaden the sources of particularly folks who work in their safeguards program to a more international, less U.S., I'm tempted to say P5+1 because it would annoy someone here, but less European, Western model. Within developing countries that are considering nuclear power, it may be the very first person who's working on this particular topic. And again, there are specific state responsibilities when you start thinking about expansion of nuclear power in the nuclear security non-proliferation realm that you have to address. So
one or two question more? Yeah, please.
if it's a tough question, Tariq, I'll pass it to Francesca.
As you know, the IAEA has put out the course syllabus for a 2-year master's course in nuclear security, and I was wondering whether your university makes use of it or you've developed your own. Second, do you offer MOOCs or massive online open courses in nuclear security? And then third, and related, the World Nuclear Association has produced a manual called Nuclear English, so where they put technical terms in English for non-native English speakers. And I was wondering whether your program had also put out such a manual, because I think it would be very useful for people coming from countries where English is not a native language to help them with the terminology.
Okay, so let me take them in order. We're very familiar with the two-year master's program in nuclear security that the INSEN framework has established. We use an adaptation of that for our program. Partly that's driven by internal bureaucratic issues with the approval of degree programs within the United States and in the state of Tennessee in particular. We do, however, assess our program on a routine basis against the requirements in the INSEN curriculum. We also have to expand that because as a U.S. institution, a number of our consumers, the people who hire our students, are within the U.S. government or the U.S. government laboratory community. And the U.S. as a nuclear weapons state has some different requirements. They may not understand the requirements, as I've often found, but they have different requirements for what they're trying to hire. And so we have to be responsive to that. So we take the INSEN information, we use it very heavily, but we also have to augment that for our specific locale. In terms of MOOCs and other online programs, our university actually began an online program in our nuclear engineering master's degree maybe 15 years ago, but we actually found that it was difficult to manage and difficult to do well. And I think many of the MOOC programs are finding the same thing. So we've actually moved away from that in the recent past. In terms of nuclear English through the journal, the students who work on that are compiling sort of a lexicon of technical terms and academic terms in nuclear security that are useful for authors. It is very thin, in my opinion, at this point. They haven't had a lot of these students are volunteers, so they haven't had a lot of time to work on it, but that's available on the Institute's website.
Okay, thank you for your presentation and many questions. Thank you very much. Our last presentation will be given by Dr. Mansong Lin. Dr. Lin received his bachelor and master in nuclear engineering from Seoul National University and a PhD in nuclear engineering from University of Cincinnati through Fulbright Scholarship. He also received a Master of Science and Doctor of Science in Environmental Health Science from Harvard University. Actually, he is a professor and head Department of Nuclear and Quantum Engineering in KAIST. Now he is charging of director for Nuclear Nonproliferation and Education and Research Center, NEREC. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Choi, and thank you all of you to staying with us until the last part of this conference. One, advertising for Professor Hall's journal, International Journal of Nuclear Security, I would encourage our fellows to think about submitting a paper to that journal.
I forgot to mention there was student paper competition with a small cash prize.
And I happen to be an member of the editorial board, so we all encourage students to submit papers unless you have something else to think about. I gave a similar presentation in Beijing maybe a month or 2 months ago. There are Professor Lee, Professor Steve Miller, Francesca, all they were there. So I didn't want to give the same presentation, but then see how it goes. So we have here today 446 nuclear power plants in 32 different countries. The number hasn't changed much. We thought that the number might go down when nuclear power plants shutting down in the United States, and some of the Western European countries are really going through the phase out. The numbers not going down, numbers going up, especially with the development in Northeast Asia and China. Here is a picture of what is going to happen in the future. Not all of this will be realized, but we see a list of countries in the nuclear power states and also what I call aspiring states. Originally I stole this slide from Scott Sagan, but we expanded it. The greens are basically the countries with a plan to build nuclear power. And I put Vietnam on the red because they have canceled the plan, but they may come back to green. So the point here is we do see quite a bit of countries on the aspiring side with green color, meaning these are the countries without any prior experience in running nuclear power plant, but they are interested in or serious about running nuclear power plants. I actually want to go back and revisit some of the issues that Francesca raised. So these are the countries who started what we call KAIST development under the IAEA support from 1954 through 1973, 57 countries. You see not many black. The red means they don't have nuclear power. Some countries I changed the colors, like Turkey, Bangladesh, and Iran. They actually now used to be no nuclear power category, but now they have nuclear power. But the bottom line is, many countries failed, although the actually number of countries from the left column to downward represent the amount of funding they received from IAEA. So Brazil received most, India followed by Argentina, Pakistan, Chile, Philippines, and so on, going down all the way to the last. Although they received significant amount of funding and support, they didn't have nuclear power. Why? I think some of the points that Francesca made earlier actually brings home in this discussion. Philippines, for example, they had almost completed the plant, but then they decided to change that plan because of potentially the corruption issue, mistrust against the government. The same thing with Turkey and so on. Basically, the message from here is it is very difficult to start a nuclear power program. And I think there are lots of stories, lots of lessons we can learn out of this. So here are sort of challenges summarized in terms of developing nuclear power. You need money, large sum of money upfront. You need to have a good administrative and regulatory institutions with good quality to run everything about nuclear power. You need good people. I think Professor Harper just talked about it. And you have to have good enough, large enough size electric grid. You have to have a site that can actually accommodate nuclear power plant, which is very sometimes difficult. And you have to have capabilities, materials, technologies, services, usually not coming from indigenous capability initially. Many of the countries start from turnkey based and they don't have the infrastructure to support, but they build upon those over the years. As Francesca mentioned, nuclear power brings in social change. Country may become democratized. An example, South Korea. When South Korea started nuclear power, we were not a democratic country, but has transformed into a democratic country. But also it comes with what we call social divide. There is a deepening mistrust maybe against government because of the social divide. So be aware, those changes will come, and depending on the social culture and pre-existing conditions, different forms of transformation. Obviously, nuclear power started with dual use, and we have very strict international requirements and norms in terms of how to access and use that technology. And once you start nuclear power, you run it maybe 40 years, 60 years, in the case of the United States, maybe 80 years. But then you have to take care of the technology or the legacy for forever. Basically, nuclear waste management, high-level waste safety requirement is going up to 1 million years. In the United States, 1 million years. Some countries, 10,000 years. But basically, 10,000 years means forever. Human institutions have not existed more than 10,000 years. And political commitment to support all of them. So now IAEA is aware of all these challenges and they come up with this list. These are the things that you have to check on to be able to make sure that you are ready. But then this list doesn't cover everything that we just covered. So we talked about this governance challenges, government characteristics. Here is a comparison between nuclear power users, current users, and nuclear newcomers. You can see just by simply looking at this slide, huge difference between the governance characteristics between the two groups. So I sort of tried to pick on some countries. Who has the weakest governance characteristic among the current users? I highlighted them. So for example here, Pakistan, Ukraine, they have an issue in terms of governance, corruption. Now, using the minimum, actually lowest number, what about the newcomer or potential importers? What about their capability, characteristics? Are they better or worse? Basically, this highlighted country is saying they have worse than the existing nuclear power countries. So we have some concerns with countries, especially Nigeria and Sudan. Their governance characteristic appears to be very not great. We also think that the public trust and support from the government for the government is very important part of nuclear power development. So we try to look at this issue of nuclear acceptance, public perception. These are the basically nuclear users coming from various sources. Not every country has this public poll, but then I was hoping that there is a pattern, but actually in this case there is no pattern. In other words, newcomer countries are supposed to have a more higher public acceptance than the existing power users. I think part of it is countries develop and become democratized, and they actually develop also mistrust against the government. After benefiting from the technology, they may realize that we are better off, but then become risk averse and more cautious about risk. After seeing the accidents happening around the world, they actually turn against nuclear powers. That's happening. So that will eventually be a challenge for any country embarking on this. But then already here we see Poland, Saudi Arabia, Morocco having negative perception on this. So it will be a very much challenging for those countries to start. Turning our focus a little bit toward the suppliers. So as we know, this technology has been driven by the export. So nuclear supplier has been responsible or has been basically dominating the governance issue or maybe technology transfer and even the non-professional and security issues. So it used to be mostly dominated by Western vendors in the 1980s, but now today you can see up to the right side, now I think United States, Westinghouse is bankrupt, so we don't know exactly what had happened to Westinghouse. Now Japan, industry is trying very hard, but it's having difficulty. France is having difficulty with the EPR project in Finland and France and so on. Now, these companies have become either very much multinational or very much domestic. So Russian vendors, Chinese vendors, Korean vendors, pretty much very much domestic, whereas the other vendors have become actually very weak in the global market. And in terms of new confirmed project, you can see Russia is dominating. In terms of tentative project, also Russia is dominating and now China is coming. Although France, Korea, United States has still some hope, but picture is already painted. We know Russia, China is going to dominate. This is basically showing how nuclear cooperation happened over the last 20-some years post-Cold War. In terms of front end, nuclear power plant construction, back end cooperation and research development, research-directed development. But then let's look at only nuclear power. So we have done analysis, basically, which factors drive the nuclear cooperation between the countries. So we have 101 countries. We try to look at dyad and 35 dyads, and then try to identify which factors become very important in this. Sorry. And then if you look at the left-hand bottom corner, basically we found that controlling variables, major variables, are commercial interest driven or military interest driven. Arms trade, foreign direct investment, geographical proximity, and negative, level of rivalry in terms of negative relationship. So this nuclear cooperation is not necessarily driven by the technology or the quality of the technology, but it's more driven by bilateral relationship and what they are actually doing in terms of economy or military cooperation. So here are 18 successful cases of non-proliferation in the history. These are the countries who started nuclear power and also started nuclear proliferation attempt, but stopped. So they forego their nuclear proliferation ambition. And out of these 18 cases presented here, 8 of them are stopped by bilateral effort, mostly by United States. Current United States 1-2-3 agreement covers 25 countries, but 99% of generating capacity. We have other factors, multilateral factors a little bit, and then domestic politics change a little bit, but basically showing that bilateral efforts has been very effective and very important in non-proliferation. But then now we have this potential exporters, where China, Russia will be dominating, but their non-proliferation regime, non-credentials are not stellar. So something we need to think about. And also, nuclear fuel cycle is something that every nuclear country has to address. Your fuel usually doesn't come from your own soil. Your spent fuel usually is something that you are not capable of handling. So you have different countries providing your fuel, with different countries providing the services, maybe even different countries providing spent fuel management. Actually, a country with 1 or 2 nuclear power plants with limited resources probably cannot handle all the burden they have to take care of. So, although nuclear power is a sovereign activity, you as a sovereign nation cannot solve the problem of running nuclear power plants successfully. And that also involves some of the materials that is potentially of concern, which uranium and then spent fuel, presence of plutonium, and so on. So this is a sort of an old paper, not quite old. We try to look at what factors potentially contribute toward inhibition of proliferation decisions or promotion of proliferation decisions. Here, at least, it's a busy slide, but bottom line, participation in international norm, governance, is a very important part of proliferation inhibition. And interestingly, the presence of successful nuclear power generating capacity actually works as an inhibitor. In other words, you develop nuclear power capability and see it's actually very beneficial, very useful to your economy and so on, then you abstain from further developing something else. And also, connection to the global economy becomes a very important part of the abstaining part. But then in terms of proliferation decision, obviously, it's driven by mostly international security concerns. We also wanted to see, well, how does this decision explore to develop nuclear power or pursue nuclear power a little bit more seriously or acquire a functional nuclear weapon is related to the eventual success of commercial power. So basically we have tried to examine the relationship between the capacity of nuclear power generation in your country and the decision to build nuclear power, starting with explore, pursue, and acquire. Basically, at the explorer level, the decision to explore nuclear power has a positive effect for nuclear power development. So, in other words, this sort of implies many countries start with dual-use purpose. But then if you go further, for pursue and acquire, basically has negative effect. You will not have a very good successful nuclear power program if you continue with that kind of decisions.
You have 2 minutes.
Yes, I knew. I slept on. So if we look at the history, basically we had a wave of countries who were interested in nuclear weapons as part of nuclear power, atoms of peace. But then the wave is sort of gone. So we have depleted the interest for various reasons. But now we have new countries coming on the scene, and we saw those countries. And these countries, basically participation comparison between the new users. This is the picture of how these newcomer countries, potential user countries, are participating in international regimes. You see a lot of yellows basically saying, no, they are not participating in this regime, compared to what we see among the current users. In the export control, non-proliferation regime, US Security Council Resolution 1540 completion rate, and so on. So if you compare simply NTI scores, security score, US Security 1540 scores, and then terrorism risk, you see again a very clear difference between the two groups. But then if you look at how these countries are doing in terms of their R&D, technological capability development, they're working very hard. All these countries plan nuclear power plant, and then the scientific efforts, output coming out to the right side of the screen. Basically, they're doing a lot of investment. But if you look at the left side, UN Security Council resolutions completion rate, they're not really putting much effort. In terms of, again, international legal commitment, voluntary commitment, this is how the picture looks for current users. But then if you look at the potential importers, newcomers, again, this is basically the picture showing a lot of yellows for countries, and many of the countries actually talked about. Some of the countries actually applies to, I think, their fellows. I also wanted to look at the issue of transparency, because transparency, as we know, is very important. And it's very hard to measure transparency. We sort of try, we use some expert survey, and then use that survey data and develop correlation, and then use that correlation and then apply to all the countries and came up with scores. I was hoping to see some difference, but in this case, not much difference, transparency scores between the newcomers and the users. In terms of IEA, are they ready to cope with these future upcoming challenges? Basically, the flat curve means the budget hasn't gone up. As we know, it's a zero growth policy. And the funding mostly comes from selected number of countries, 1/3 come from the United States, and then that was not enough, and they have this extra budgetary contributions, and that's not sustainable, basically. And this funding has been steady for the last decades, and so over the decades, basically, we may not be able to continue the efforts we have been doing. And sort of we come again, this is FOM's effort, come up with an estimated safeguard burden, and then who should be responsible. Basically, you see the blue curves showing that this country is potentially responsible in the future. But then not many of those countries actually paying enough. So let me conclude. We see these countries, newcomer countries, do not necessarily have the good governance characteristics. And they don't have the basically investment in non-professional export control regime or less commitment in that. This has to be examined in the future efforts of nuclear export or nuclear development. And IAEA's current policy may needs to be revisited. So again, this is my final slide. Good governance characteristic. It's currently not part of IAEA's recommended milestone. Should be considered as part of the guideline for newcomer countries. The risk environment, financial risk, taking into account